Remember those headlines? A big bank making some really questionable calls on investments, or maybe a company board getting a total overhaul after some scandal?
Yeah, those stories always make waves.
And it really makes you wonder what actually goes on behind those corporate closed doors. I mean, what keeps a company accountable? Who decides where it's headed?
Those are, well, fundamental questions. And the answer really lies in something called corporate governance. It's not just jargon, it's the actual system. The rules, the practices, the processes a company uses to, direct and control itself.
Okay, so it's about setting the goals, figuring out how to achieve them, and then, I guess, keeping an eye on performance.
Exactly. And it's also about that intricate web of relationships between management, the board, shareholders, and really anyone else with a stake in the company, other stakeholders.
So our mission today in this deep dive is to unpack all of that. The core principles, maybe explore some of the theories behind why companies act the way they do.
And importantly, see how it plays out in the real world, especially within banking. We'll look at the structures meant to protect companies and you from, well, major missteps, and maybe uncover a few surprising things about top-level decisions.
And we've got some really solid source material to guide us. A deep look into governance principles, frameworks like the Malaysian Code of Corporate Governance, the MCCG, and some, frankly, fascinating case studies involving banks.
Right. So let's dive in.
Let's start with the basics then, defining those pillars. What is corporate governance at its heart?
At its core, it's really just that system we mentioned, how a company is directed and controlled. It sets the objectives, defines how to reach them, and monitors performance along the way. It's all about accountability, really, effective decision-making.
And you mentioned the MCCG, the Malaysian Code. How does that fit in? Is it like a rule book?
Not exactly a rule book. It's more principles-based. It provides guidance, best practices for good governance. The focus is very much on sustainable business growth and critically protecting the interests of stakeholders.
Okay, principles-based. What are some of those key principles?
Well, the MCCG lays out 5 foundational ones. Think of them like the bedrock. First, board responsibilities and effectiveness, how the board operates. Second, corporate culture and values, setting the right tone.
Right.
Third, robust risk management and internal controls. Fourth, transparency and disclosure, being open about what's happening. And fifth, stakeholder engagement and shareholder rights, making sure everyone's voice can be heard.
That sounds pretty comprehensive. It seems like it touches almost everything a company does.
It really does. It covers regulatory compliance, sure, but also ethical conduct, even community engagement. It's broad.
And you see this clearly in banking examples.
Oh, absolutely. Take board composition in Malaysian banks. There are requirements for balance, specifically having independent director.
Why independent?
To ensure unbiased decision-making, people not tied to the day-to-day management. Then there's risk management. Banks need really robust frameworks for credit risk, market risk, operational risk, you name it.
Makes sense.
And transparency, regular disclosure of financial results, how they're complying with governance codes, their risk practices. It's all out there.
Okay, so drilling down to the listener, why does all this matter to you? Why should someone care about the governance of their bank?
Well, think about it. When an institution you trust with your money, like your bank, has strong governance, it builds trust. Stability.
Right, peace of mind.
Exactly. It gives you confidence they're making sound decisions, looking out for the long term, not just, a quick profit. It's like an invisible shield protecting your financial interests.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
That's the what. But why do we even need these systems? Is it just because people can't be trusted? Which brings us to, I think, agency theory.
That's a perfect transition. Yes, agency theory gets right at that potential conflict. It basically describes the relationship between principals, usually the shareholders, the owners, and agents, the executives or managers hired to run the company.
And the core idea.
It's simple, really. Principals expect the agents to act in their best interests, to maximize the value of their investment.
Like shareholders of Maybank or a CIMB group here in Malaysia. They're the principals. They expect management, the agents, to grow the bank's value. Seems straightforward.
It does seem straightforward, but, well, interests don't always align perfectly. Managers might have their own goals, different priorities.
And that misalignment, that's where problems start.
That's where agency costs come in. These are essentially the costs that arise from trying to resolve those conflicts between principals and agents.
Okay, costs. What kind of costs are we talking about?
There are a few main types. First, you have monitoring costs. These are the expenses the principals, the shareholders incur to, well, keep an eye on the agents.
Like audits.
Exactly. The cost of conducting external audits for banks or putting in place strict compliance measures, it's all about making sure management is doing what they're supposed to.
Okay. Monitoring costs. What else?
Then there's something called residual loss. This is a bit more subtle. It's the cost that remains even after monitoring, because agents still might not act perfectly in the principal's best interests.
Can you give an example?
Sure. Imagine a bank manager makes some really high-risk investments. Maybe not illegal, but maybe overly speculative. If those investments go sour and reduce the bank's overall value, that loss in value, despite all the oversight, that's residual loss.
Right. Okay, so we have these potential conflicts and costs. This is where it gets interesting, isn't it? How do companies try to fix this to align everyone's interests?
They use a range of mechanisms. Performance-based incentives are a big one, tying managers' pay directly to company performance. Stock options, bonuses based on targets.
Makes sense. Skin in the game.
Precisely. Then there's strong monitoring by the board of directors themselves. External auditing, as we mentioned, provides an independent check. Regulations and laws set clear boundaries.
And shareholders, can they do anything?
Definitely. Shareholder activism is becoming more common, shareholders pushing for changes. Transparent communication from the company is key too. And underlying all this are fiduciary duties the legal obligation managers have to act in the company's best interest.
So if we picture a company, say ABC Corporation, how might a conflict play out?
Well, maybe the board votes to give themselves significant pay raises right before announcing mediocre results. They might argue it's deserved, but shareholders could see it as prioritizing personal gain over company performance. The cost of maybe an investigation or a shareholder vote against it, that's an agency cost.
Or XYZ Inc. A very direct agency cost there might just be the bill for hiring that big external auditor every year.
Exactly. Shareholders pay that fee directly to monitor management and the board. It really shows why vigilance is needed. It's not automatic that interests align.
Okay, so agency theory paints a picture of potential conflict that needs managing. But isn't there another perspective, something called stewardship theory?
Yes, exactly. Stewardship theory offers a contrasting view. It's often called the good steward concept.
And the idea there is?
It suggests that managers aren't inherently self-interested, or at least not solely. It proposes they are intrinsically motivated to act in the best interests of the organization. Why? Because their own success, their reputation, their job satisfaction, it's all tied to the company doing well.
So less about direct personal gain, more about a sense of responsibility.
Precisely, a responsibility to the organization itself and to all its stakeholders, not just shareholders.
Why is this view particularly relevant for banking?
Well, several reasons. First, it fosters trust. If shareholders believe managers are genuinely acting as stewards, it reduces the need for costly monitoring.
Lower agency cost, then?
Potentially, yes. And crucially, stewards are seen as more focused on the long-term health and stability of the bank. In banking, where stability is absolutely paramount, that long-term view is vital.
Right. You don't want bankers just chasing short-term profits if it risks the whole institution.
Exactly. It suggests a natural alignment of interests, and it empowers managers, gives them more autonomy to innovate, knowing they're trusted.
Do we see examples of this stewardship approach in practice?
Sure. Managerial ownership is a classic one. When a CEO owns a significant chunk of the bank's stock, their personal wealth is directly tied to the bank's long-term success. They have a strong incentive to be a good steward.
Like putting your money where your mouth is.
Right. Or think about long-term incentive plans. Many banks use stock options or bonus plans that vest over several years. This encourages executives to focus on sustained performance, not just hitting the next quarterly target. It cultivates that stewardship mindset.
Okay, so two different ways of looking at the manager-shareholder relationship. Now let's shift gears a bit to how companies are actually structured. I understand there's a difference between insider and outsider systems.
Yes, that's a key distinction in global corporate governance. Insider systems are typically characterized by concentrated ownership. Meaning control is often held by a small group, founders, families, or large institutional shareholders. Think about government-linked companies, the GLCs, in Malaysia. Entities like the EPF or Khazanah Nasional hold significant stakes.
Like a national pension fund or sovereign wealth fund.
Exactly. You see similar structures historically in places like Germany, too.
What are the upsides of that?
Well, the main pro is potentially strong alignment between ownership and control. Everyone's pulling in the same direction, often with a long-term focus. It could also mean lower agency costs because the owners are directly involved.
But the downsides.
The risks are significant too. Nepotism can be an issue. There might be less transparency for outside investors. Minority shareholders can feel marginalized. And there's a risk of entrenchment where the insiders protect their own positions, sometimes at the expense of the company.
Okay, so that's the insider system. What about the outsider system?
Outsider systems are the opposite in many ways. Ownership is dispersed, lots of shareholders, none with dominant control. Control is exercised mainly through the board of directors, and the market plays a big role. Think UK, USA.
So a publicly traded Malaysian bank with thousands of shareholders and a professional management team might fit this.
It could, yes. The pros here are often greater transparency and accountability, driven by market pressures. Market discipline can be strong. Well, you might have higher agency costs because of that potential conflict between dispersed owners and managers. There's also the risk of short-termism pressure from the market for quick results, and ownership can be less stable.
Now, you mentioned a case study earlier, United Trust Bank, UTB. How does that illustrate these system differences?
UTB is fascinating because it really highlights the challenges that can arise in an insider-like situation, even within a generally outsider market.
Wow.
At UTB, the CEO was also the chairman of the board, and several other executives were also on the board.
So management was basically overseeing itself.
That was the perception, yes.
Yeah.
It created a clear concern about a lack of independence and objective oversight. Decisions seemed focused on short-term profits, potentially neglecting long-term value and risk management. Classic agency problems, really, stemming from that concentrated power at the top.
A real-world example of those theories in action. Okay, let's zoom in on the board itself, the board of directors. You called it the company's compass earlier.
Absolutely. It sits at the heart of governance. And the MCCG gives pretty clear guidance on its roles. It's multifaceted.
Can you break that down? What are the core responsibilities?
You can boil it down to a few key areas. Setting the overall leadership and strategy. Providing effective oversight and control over management. Implementing robust risk management. Shaping the corporate culture and values.
Those sound like the big strategic ones.
They are, but there's more. Managing shareholder relations, monitoring corporate performance, ensuring compliance with laws, promoting board independence and diversity. They even oversee their own board development and have to balance the interests of all stakeholders.
That's a huge remit. What's a common misconception you think listeners might have about how a board actually operates day to day?
That's a great question. I think maybe that they're involved in the nitty-gritty, the daily operations, but really their role is strategic, oversight. They set the direction, approve major decisions, ask tough questions, but they don't run the company day to day. That's management's job.
Right. And the composition of the board matters hugely here, especially in banking.
Definitely. In Malaysia, Bank Negara Malaysia, BNM, regulates this, guided by the MCCG. Ideally, you want an independent chairman, and a majority of the board should be independent, non-executive directors, INEDs.
INDs. What makes them independent?
They have no significant financial or other ties to the company, apart from their directors' fees. They bring an objective outside perspective. Then you have non-executive directors, or NEDs, who aren't independent but aren't executives either, and a minimum number of executive directors who are part of the senior management team.
And boards often have committees to handle specific tasks.
Yes, crucial committees. The audit committee oversees financial reporting and internal controls, ensuring the numbers are right. The nomination committee finds and recommends new directors, ensuring the board has the right mix of skills.
Makes sense.
The risk committee oversees the bank's overall risk appetite and management framework. The remuneration committee decides on executive pay, trying to align it with performance and long-term strategy. And increasingly, you see sustainability committees focusing on ESG, environmental, social, and governance issues.
Now, underlying all this,
Yeah.
there's a core legal obligation, isn't there? Fiduciary duties.
Okay, let's unpack this because it's critical.
Yeah.
Yes, fiduciary duties are not optional. They are a fundamental legal requirement for every director.
What do they entail?
Several key duties. The duty of care. Directors must be informed, ask questions, and make decisions diligently. The duty of loyalty. They must act in the best interests of the company, putting its interests ahead of their own.
Loyalty is key.
Absolutely. Then there's the duty to act in good faith and for a proper purpose, not for some ulterior motive. The duty to avoid conflicts of interest. The duty of confidentiality. And ultimately, the duty to promote the success of the company for the benefit of its members as a whole.
So these are serious legal obligations. From what you've seen, which of these duties tends to be the weak spot, the one that most often leads to corporate trouble?
That's a tough one. But often it comes down to the duty of loyalty and the duty to avoid conflicts of interest. When personal relationships, side deals, or self-interest start creeping into the boardroom, that's when the integrity of the whole process can break down, when decisions aren't made purely for the company's benefit.
And the consequences if directors breach these duties.
They can be severe. Personal liability, meaning they might have to pay damages out of their own pocket, removal from the board, disqualification from being a director elsewhere, and in serious cases, even criminal charges. It's not taken lightly.
Definitely not. Okay, so within the board structure, what about the specific roles? Chairman, CEO, how do they differ?
Good question. The chairman leads the board itself, sets the agenda, runs the meetings, ensures the board functions effectively, and often acts as a link between the board and the CEO. The CEO, or Chief Executive Officer, leads the management team. They're responsible for executing the strategy set by the board and running the company's day-to-day operations.
And the company secretary.
Yeah.
Often overlooked, but important.
Very important. The company secretary advises the board on governance matters, ensures compliance with laws and regulations, manages board papers and minutes, and handles the logistical side of board operations, kind of the governance guardian.
And how is the board held accountable to the shareholders?
Primarily through the annual general meeting, the AGM. That's the main forum where shareholders get to engage. They approve the annual report and accounts, vote on re-electing directors, approve the auditors, and vote on any major resolutions.
And if something urgent comes up,
Then the company can call an extraordinary general meeting, or EGM. This is for critical issues that need shareholder approval outside the normal AGM cycle, like a major acquisition or a change in the company's constitution.
okay, so we have the internal structures of the board, management, but there are external checks too, right? Regulators.
Absolutely crucial, especially in banking. These are the watchdogs.
And in Malaysia, Bank Negara Malaysia, B&M, plays a huge role.
Pivotal. B&M is the central bank and the main regulator for the financial sector. Think of them as ensuring the overall health and stability of the system.
You mentioned fit and proper criteria earlier. How does B&M practically use that to, well, filter out bad actors from running banks?
Excellent question. Their fit and proper criteria for key people, board members, CEOs, senior managers, are very stringent. It involves deep background checks, assessing their experience, integrity, reputation, and financial soundness. They want to ensure the people in charge are competent and trustworthy.
So it's not just about qualifications, but character too.
Very much so. B&M also provides guidance on training and competency development. Beyond people, they set prudential regulations rules on capital adequacy, how much capital banks must hold, liquidity, having enough cash, leverage, all designed to keep banks safe and sound.
And they watch closely.
Constantly. Through supervision and monitoring, they review banks' risk management, conduct stress tests, and if banks don't comply, B&M has enforcement and disciplinary actions. They can impose fines, sanctions, even remove individuals.
Wow.
They also play a role in crisis management and resolution if a bank gets into trouble, and continuously develop policy and guidance to keep up with international standards and emerging risks.
Okay, B&M is the external watchdog. What about internal risk management frameworks within the banks themselves? I've heard of the 3 lines of defense.
Yes, that's a really important framework for how banks manage risk internally. It structures responsibility.
So the first line.
That's the operational management. The business units themselves, they own and manage the risks they take as part of their daily activities. They're on the front line.
Okay, they take the risks. Then the second line.
This includes functions like risk management and compliance. They provide oversight for the first line. They set the policies, the frameworks, monitor compliance, and help the business manage risk effectively. But they don't own the risk itself.
They're like the internal police, sort of.
In a way, yes, or maybe the navigators. And then you have the third line,
which is internal audit. Now, this sounds pretty robust on paper, right? 3 lines. But where's the catch? What makes it truly work or fail?
The key is independence, especially for that third line. Internal audit needs to provide independent, objective assurance directly to the board and senior management about how well the first 2 lines are working. They audit the entire system.
So they need to be able to challenge management, even the board.
Absolutely. If internal audit isn't truly independent, if it's afraid to raise difficult issues, the whole framework can weaken significantly. That independence is where the rubber meets the road.
Okay. If we connect all this theory and structure to the bigger picture, Nothing really drives home the importance of governance like seeing what happens when it fails, right? Case studies.
Exactly. Learning from mistakes or near mistakes is powerful. Let's talk about Rockaway Bank. It's a classic, unfortunately, example of multiple governance failures stacking up. And it really highlights the human element.
Right. What were the key issues there? I remember reading about it. Wasn't there a close relationship at the top?
Yes, the CEO, Jonathan Dorsa, and the chairman were related brothers-in-law. This immediately raised flags about independence and objective oversight.
And they make some risky moves.
Extremely risky. High-risk investments were made without proper board review or risk assessment. They were issuing high-yield loans to customers with poor credit, massively increasing the bank's risk exposure.
And didn't they cut back on controls?
They did. The internal audit department was downsized, supposedly to cut costs, but it critically weakened that independent oversight function, that third line of defense.
And the worst part.
Insider trading. Several board members were found to have traded on non-public information, a complete breakdown of ethics and controls. Now, looking at Rockway, what fundamental insight does it offer about the human element in these kinds of failures?
I think it shows how easily personal relationships and, frankly, greed can override professional duties and establish checks and balances. Trust was misplaced, conflicts were ignored, and the system designed to prevent this just crumbled.
And the consequences were predictable. Huge financial instability risk, terrible reputational damage, major regulatory penalties. The recommendations were clear. Restructure the board for real independence and diversity. Implement a proper risk framework aligned with international standards like the BCBS guidelines from the Basel Committee.
The global standard setter for banking.
Exactly. Strengthen internal controls. Drastically improve communication and transparency. A complete overhaul was needed.
Then there was the bank XYZ scenario. That seemed to cover almost every possible governance mistake.
It was like a checklist of what not to do. An imbalanced board, too many executives, not enough independent voices, no real diversity, director appointments based on who you knew, not what you knew, some directors there for decades with no term limits.
And their actual conduct.
Reports of neglected fiduciary duties, unethical behavior, a non-executive director who was completely ineffective. The CEO was also the chairman, that classic conflict. The CEO apparently ignoring compliance and risk. Even the company secretary lacked the necessary experience.
It sounds like a recipe for disaster.
Mm-hmm.
But these aren't just hypotheticals, right? These are common pitfalls companies can fall into.
Absolutely. Any company can drift this way if governance isn't actively managed and prioritized, but the solutions are often quite clear, too.
Such as
Appoint more truly independent directors. Establish clear diversity policies. Create a proper nomination committee for merit-based appointments. Implement and enforce codes of conduct. Separate the CEO and chairman roles, that's a big one. Invest in training and professional development, especially for roles like the company's secretary. It's really about building the right structure and culture.
Okay, so learning from failures is crucial. Let's end on something more forward-looking. Integrated reporting. What's that about?
This is a shift in how companies report. It goes beyond just the financial numbers. Integrated reporting aims to show how a company creates or sometimes destroys value over time for all its stakeholders.
So not just shareholders.
Right. It looks at strategy, governance, performance, yes, but also the company's social and environmental context. It's a more holistic picture of value creation.
Why is this particularly valuable for bankers or anyone assessing a company?
It gives a much richer understanding of an organization's risks and opportunities beyond just the balance sheet. That leads to better lending or investment decisions. It encourages companies to think long-term about sustainability, and it increases transparency, building trust with a wider range of stakeholders.
And we're seeing boards focus more on these broader areas now.
Yeah.
Like ESG.
Definitely. Boards are increasingly grappling with strategic issues like sustainability, setting targets for carbon emissions, for example, financial inclusion, how to serve underserved communities, open banking, managing the risks and opportunities of data sharing. And yes, integrating ESG environmental, social governance factors right into their core strategy, policies, and reporting.
So how do these broader considerations actually change corporate governance?
They fundamentally expand what the board needs to oversee. Success isn't just profit anymore. It's about long-term value creation in a much broader sense, considering environmental impact, social responsibility, and robust governance altogether. It changes the questions the board asks and the metrics they use.
Wow. Okay, well, we have covered a lot of ground today.
We certainly have.
From The basic definition and theories like agency and stewardship, through the critical role of the board and its duties, the regulatory landscape with BNM, and those really insightful, if sobering, case studies.
And I think the key takeaway is that good corporate governance isn't just some bureaucratic checklist. It's absolutely fundamental. It's the bedrock for a company's stability, its trustworthiness, and ultimately its long-term success.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener, tuning in?
Well, understanding these concepts gives you a powerful lens. Whether you're a customer of a bank, an employee, or an investor, you can start to see the signs of a well-run organization. And just as importantly, maybe spot the warning flags when things aren't quite right behind the scenes.
Absolutely. It empowers you to ask better questions. So here's a final thought to leave you with. In our world today, with constant pressure for short-term results, but also a growing demand for long-term sustainability and social responsibility, how do you think the role of a company's board needs to evolve even further? How can it truly serve all stakeholders, not just shareholders? And what new forms of accountability might we see emerging in the next decade? Something to ponder.